I never thought I would live to see the day when my own daughter would raise her voice at me. I am 70 years old, 70, and I have lived through hunger, war, heartbreak, and loss. But somehow, the sharpness of her words cut deeper than all the years life ever threw at me. Her name is Melissa, my only child, the one I carried through 9 months of loneliness after her father walked away. The one I worked 3 jobs for, just so she could wear clean shoes and have books in her hands. Now she stands in my kitchen, pointing her finger at me like I'm some stranger who doesn't belong. "Don't you dare touch the food, Mom," she had shouted that morning, her eyes blazing. "My husband's family is coming. Everything has to be perfect." Her husband's family. That's all she ever talks about these days. His family, his people, his needs. As if I'm some guest in my own home. You see, when Melissa and David lost their apartment after he lost his job, I didn't think twice. I opened my doors. I told them to stay as long as they needed. I even offered to cover groceries until they got back on their feet. It's been 8 months now, and somehow I've become the unwanted one. That morning, I woke up early as always. The house was quiet, filled with the faint smell of coffee and laundry detergent. I smiled to myself as I started preparing breakfast. Eggs, bacon, fresh orange juice. But before I could even reach the fridge, Melissa came storming in wearing her silk robe, her hair pinned up like some princess about to meet royalty. "Mom, stop," she snapped, slapping the spatula out of my hand. "Don't touch anything. My husband's family is coming for dinner tonight. I want everything perfect." I blinked. "Sweetheart, I was just making breakfast." She rolled her eyes. "I already planned the meals." "Mom, please don't make a mess of the kitchen again. You'll just confuse me." I froze, the way she said again, as if I were some nuisance she tolerated. I wanted to remind her that this was still my home, my name on the deed, my savings that paid for this roof over her head. But instead, I swallowed my pride. That's something we mothers do too well. The rest of the morning, I stayed out of her way. I sat in my favorite armchair by the window, pretending to read while she moved around like a queen, ordering me and David around. "David, take out the trash. Mom, don't sit there. I need that space for the decorations. Mom, can you at least go change into something decent before they arrive?" Something decent. I looked down at my faded cardigan, the same one I wore when I used to walk her to school in the rain. The same one she used to bury her face into when she cried after her first heartbreak. Now she was embarrassed by it. Embarrassed by me. Around noon, she came running back from the grocery store, arms full of expensive food I'd never buy. Imported cheese, premium wine, shrimp, and fancy sauces she probably saw on some cooking show. "Mom," she said, exasperated, "don't start putting things away. I have a system. I'll organize the fridge." I smiled quietly and said, "All right, dear." But I couldn't help noticing how she filled the fridge, and how every shelf I had stocked with fresh vegetables and homemade pickles ended up in the trash. My heart tightened, but I said nothing, because I had seen this side of her before, pride mixed with insecurity, the kind that makes people cruel without realizing it. By evening, the table was set like something out of a magazine. Candles, fancy plates, napkins folded into swans. She looked beautiful, radiant, and utterly distant. I stood by the doorway, my old hands clasped together, watching her dart around with nervous energy. "Mom, please," she said sharply. "Don't interfere. I don't want them thinking we're messy." "We?" I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry, so I stayed quiet. But something inside me, something buried for years, began to stir. When David's family arrived, there was polite laughter, the smell of perfume, the clinking of wine glasses. They complimented the house, the decor, everything except me. I might as well have been invisible. Melissa laughed with them, talking about their plans, their dreams, and their vacations. And when someone asked who owned the house, she hesitated, just long enough for me to notice. She said softly, "Well, technically it's Mom's, but we all live here now." Technically, that word stung like acid. After dinner, she guided everyone to the living room for dessert. But when she opened the fridge to get the cake, her face went pale. She froze. Then she said, her voice trembling, "Mom, where's the cheesecake I bought?" I looked up slowly from my chair. "Oh, that?" I thought it was leftover cream. "I used it for the stew." Her eyes widened in horror. "You what? Mom!" "That was imported." "I told you not to touch the fridge!" Everyone went silent. I could feel all eyes turning to me. The old, forgetful woman who ruined the perfect dinner. But I didn't speak. I just smiled. Because the truth was, that cheesecake wasn't gone. It was sitting right where she left it, in the freezer. Only the freezer now held something else beside it. Something I knew she'd never forget. She stormed into the kitchen, yanked the freezer door open, and the moment she did, her scream filled the whole house. Everyone jumped to their feet. She stumbled back, hand on her mouth, eyes wide with shock. Her father-in-law shouted, "What happened?" But she couldn't answer. She just pointed at the freezer, trembling. And I sat there, calm as ever, my hands folded neatly on my lap. Because in that freezer, wrapped in a plastic bag, wasn't food. It was the past she had tried to bury. For a moment, no one spoke. The room fell into a silence so deep that I could hear the soft ticking of the clock above the stove. Melissa's hand was still shaking as she pointed toward the freezer, her lips moving but no words coming out. David, her husband, hurried over. "Melissa, what is it?" But she didn't answer. Her face had turned the color of chalk, and her eyes looked as if she'd just seen a ghost. He looked at me, confused. "Mom, what's going on?" I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just kept that same faint smile on my face. Finally, he walked to the freezer and leaned in. And then he froze too. He slowly turned toward me. His expression caught somewhere between disbelief and horror. What is this?" Wrapped neatly inside that freezer bag was a small baby blanket. Pink, faded and still carrying faint stains from years ago. And next to it, tucked carefully in an old tin box, was a bundle of letters. Melissa knew exactly what they were, because they were hers. Letters she had written at 16 years old. Letters she had begged me to destroy. Letters to the boy who had broken her heart and left. Her with a secret that almost ruined her life. She stumbled backward, clutching her chest. "Mom, why do you still have those?" Her voice cracked. The guests, her husband's parents, her sister-in-law, were all staring in confusion. "What's going on?" her mother-in-law asked sharply. I finally spoke. My voice was calm, almost gentle. "Those," I said softly, "are reminders, my dear, of everything we survive and everything we pretend to forget." Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "You promised you burned them." "I did promise," I replied, "but I couldn't. I thought maybe one day you'd remember who you were, before the world taught you to be ashamed." She turned away, covering her face. "You had no right." "No right?" I repeated, my voice quiet but firm. "No right to keep a piece of my daughter's soul safe when she was breaking apart?" David looked utterly lost. "Melissa, what is this about?" But she didn't answer him. Because that pink blanket, the one she recognized instantly, had belonged to her baby. The baby she lost when she was 16. I still remember that winter like it was yesterday. She had come home from school, pale and silent, her hands trembling. She didn't have to tell me, I already knew. A mother always knows. She cried for days. I held her every night, whispering that everything would be okay. But society, people, they don't forgive girls like her. So we hid. We told no one. And when the baby came, a stillbirth, cold and lifeless, and we buried the pain in silence, she made me swear to destroy everything. The blanket, the letters, the proof that any of it had ever happened. And I did destroy almost everything. Except those two things. Because a mother cannot erase her child's truth, even if her child begs her to. That night, as Melissa stood in my kitchen trembling before her in-laws, I could see every wall she had built over the years crumbling piece by piece. All her pride, her anger, her desperate need to appear perfect, it came from this. From the wound that never healed. I hadn't meant to expose her like that. But I had seen how far she had drifted from herself, from kindness, from empathy, from the very heart I raised her to have. I had kept those memories frozen not to hurt her, but to remind her of who she was before she turned into someone who shouted at her mother for touching the fridge. Her husband's mother cleared her throat awkwardly. I think we should give you both some space. They left quietly, whispering among themselves. The front door clicked shut. For the first time that evening, the house was silent again. Melissa turned to me, her voice trembling with fury. You embarrassed me, Mom. You humiliated me in front of everyone. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not a grown woman, but the same frightened girl I once held in my arms. I didn't embarrass you, I said softly. The truth isn't meant to humiliate. It's meant to free. She shook her head violently. You don't understand. You ruined everything. They'll never look at me the same again. Maybe, I said. But maybe now they'll see the real you, not the mask you keep wearing. Tears streamed down her face. Why couldn't you just let it go? Why couldn't you just forget? Because forgetting is what made you like this. Melissa, I said, my voice breaking for the first time. You forgot how it feels to be hurt. And so now you hurt others without even realizing it. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she walked slowly to the freezer again. She looked inside, her fingers brushing the cold tin box, the soft edge of the blanket. She whispered, I was so young, so scared. I nodded, and I was scared too. But I stayed. I always stayed. She turned to me, her eyes full of pain and regret. You kept all this? All these years? I smiled faintly. Yes, through every move, every season, every storm. Because I knew one day, you'd need to see it again. Her body trembled as she sank to the floor, sobbing into her hands. I knelt beside her, though my knees protested. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling her heartbeat against my chest. The same heartbeat I'd once listened to through the thin walls of our tiny apartment, when she was a baby sleeping in her crib. It's okay, I whispered. You don't have to hide anymore. We stayed like that for a long time. When she finally looked up, her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes were softer and the anger gone. I'm sorry, she said quietly, for yelling, for everything. I brushed a tear from her cheek. I know, my love, I know. That night, after everyone had gone, I took the old blanket from the freezer and set it beside my chair. Melissa sat across from me, silent, her eyes distant. Then she asked the question I had been waiting to hear for 30 years. Mom, do you ever wonder what she would have looked like? The baby? I nodded, my throat tightening. Every day. I looked at Melissa, her tear-stained face glowing faintly under the soft kitchen light. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The house smelled faintly of melted wax and shrimp, remnants of the dinner that never happened. Outside, rain had begun to fall, gentle and slow, tapping against the windows like soft fingertips. She sat there holding the faded pink blanket, her fingers tracing the tiny embroidered flowers I had sewn years ago. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet that I almost didn't hear her. Do you ever wonder what she would have looked like? I swallowed hard. Every day, I said. You see, grief never leaves you. It just changes its clothes. Some days it dresses like silence, other days like anger, and sometimes it hides in the freezer, wrapped in plastic and memory. I used to dream about her, I continued softly. She was always laughing, running in the garden. She had your eyes. You know, those big brown ones that could melt anyone's heart. Melissa looked up at me, her lips trembling. I dreamed about her too. For years. I used to see her standing by my bed when I woke up. She never said anything, just smiled. Her voice cracked. But after I met David, the dream stopped. I told myself it was a sign that I'd finally moved on. I reached across the table and took her hand. Moving on, I whispered, doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying the memory without letting it break you. She stared at our joined hands for a while, then said bitterly, I was so cruel to you today. Mom, to think, I was shouting about dinner when you were the one who fed me my whole life. I smiled faintly. That's what mothers do. We let our children forget until life reminds them. She shook her head. No, I don't deserve your kindness. I leaned closer. You don't have to deserve a mother's love, Melissa. You just have it, always. We sat in silence again. The rain outside turned heavier, drumming steadily against the roof. It was strange how peace could come right after the worst kind of chaos. Just hours ago, I had felt like a stranger in my own home. Now, sitting across from my daughter, my lost, broken, beautiful daughter, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope? After a while, she stood up and walked slowly to the living room. The flickering candlelight made her shadow dance along the walls. She stopped in front of the family photo. I kept on the mantel, one taken nearly 20 years ago. It was from her wedding day. She was radiant then, young and full of dreams. I remember holding her hand before she walked down the aisle and whispering, whatever happens, always be kind. She turned to me now, her eyes glistening. I forgot that, didn't I? I nodded softly. We all forget sometimes, but kindness always finds its way home. She wiped her tears and smiled weakly. David must think I'm insane. His family, too. Let them think, I said gently. They don't know your story, and they don't have to. You only owe the truth to yourself. Her lips quivered. But Mom, why now? Why did you choose today to bring all that out? I exhaled slowly. That was the question, wasn't it? Because, I said finally, I was starting to lose you. The real you. Every time you spoke to me, it was as if you were someone else. Someone polished, perfect, and hollow. I kept wondering where my little girl went. The one who used to hug stray cats and cry at sad movies. Her eyes filled with fresh tears. I thought being perfect would make people love me. I smiled sadly. My dear, the right people will love you even when you're a mess. She came over to where I sat and knelt beside me, laying her head on my lap. I stroked her hair, soft, heavy curls just like when she was little. We stayed like that for what felt like hours. For the first time in years, I felt her heart beating against my knee, warm and alive. And then she said something I never expected to hear again. Mom, tell me about her. Tell me everything. So I did. I told her about the night her baby came too early, the storm raging outside, the candlelight flickering as I held her hand, her sobs echoing through the tiny apartment. I told her how she had whispered, I can't do this, and I had said, yes, you can. You already are. I told her how small the baby was, how perfect, how quiet, and how I had held that tiny body in my hands, praying for a heartbeat that never came. Her tears soaked through my skirt as I spoke, but I kept going. Because sometimes, speaking the pain out loud is the only way to let it rest. When I finished, Melissa whispered, I was so young. I didn't understand. I smiled faintly. None of us do, my dear. Not until it's too late. She lifted her head and looked at me, her eyes tired but clearer. Thank you for keeping that blanket, she said softly. For not letting me erase her. I couldn't, I said. She was a part of you, and I could never destroy any part of you, even the painful ones. Later that night, when she went to bed, I sat alone by the window. The storm had passed. The rain had softened into mist. I held the little blanket in my lap, tracing the stitches with my fingers. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the world felt very still. I thought of my granddaughter, the baby who never had a chance, and wondered if, somewhere beyond the stars, she could see us, if she could forgive us, And if maybe, just maybe, her little soul had guided me tonight, to finally thaw what had been frozen for so long. The clock struck midnight. I stood up slowly, my old knees protesting, and walked to the freezer. I placed the blanket inside once more, not as a secret this time, but as a memorial. When I turned around, Melissa was standing in the doorway watching me. "Mom," she whispered, "I don't want her in the freezer anymore. I want to keep her with me." And then, for the first time in 30 years, I saw her smile. Not the polite, practiced one she wore for the world, but the real one. The one I thought I'd lost forever. When she said those words, something inside me melted. For years, the cold hum of that freezer had been the heartbeat of our silence, the place where grief slept, undisturbed. Now, for the first time, the ice had begun to thaw. I nodded slowly. "Then she's yours to keep, my love." Melissa stepped closer, reaching out her trembling hands. I passed her the small pink blanket. It looked even smaller now, fragile against her grown-up fingers. She pressed it against her chest, eyes closed, breathing softly. For a moment I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who used to carry her stuffed rabbit everywhere and kiss its forehead before bed. "I don't know how I'll ever make this right," she whispered. "You already are," I said. "By remembering?" That night, we sat together in the living room. The storm had cleared, leaving the sky quiet and heavy. I made us both tea, chamomile, the kind she used to drink before school exams. We didn't talk about the dinner or her husband's family, or the awkward silence that had filled the house earlier. We just sat there sipping tea, letting the warmth replace everything the freezer had taken. After a long while, she said, "Do you think Dad ever knew?" I stared into my cup. "I think he knew what kind of man he was. And that's enough." She nodded, understanding what I didn't say. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the kitchen window. Melissa was already up, cooking breakfast. I watched her quietly as she moved, slower now, gentler. She wasn't barking orders or rushing. She was humming softly under her breath. "Coffee or tea, Mom?" she asked with a shy smile. "Coffee," I said, "just the way I taught you." We both laughed. It was a small sound, but it filled the house like a prayer. When David came into the kitchen, his eyes moved from Melissa to me. There was hesitation in his face, confusion, maybe guilt, but also softness. "Good morning," he said quietly. "Good morning," I replied, pretending nothing had happened. He poured himself coffee and sat down. I didn't sleep much last night." Melissa looked at him. "I'm sorry about everything. About yesterday." He reached for her hand. "It's okay. I didn't know. I just wish you'd told me." She looked down, tears glistening again. "I didn't know how. I was afraid you'd see me differently." He squeezed her hand. "I see you now." And I saw it too. A small, fragile truth building between them. Sometimes love needs to break before it learns how to hold properly. Later that day, Melissa and I took a walk in the garden. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of wet earth and blooming jasmine. She looked at the old oak tree in the corner of the yard, the one we planted together when she was 8. "I used to bury little notes there," she said with a laugh. "Wishes, promises, secrets." "I know," I said, smiling. "I used to dig them up after you went to sleep." She gasped, pretending to be shocked. "You read them?" "Of course. How else would I know what to pack in your lunch?" We both laughed again, the kind of laugh that feels like healing. As we walked back, Melissa stopped suddenly. "Mom," she said, "I want to tell you something. Something I should have said years ago." I turned to her, heart pounding. "I was angry at you," she said softly. "All these years. Not because of what you did, but because you stayed strong when I couldn't. I felt small next to you. I thought if I could control everything, maybe I'd finally feel like you." I touched her cheek gently. "You don't have to be like me, darling. You just have to be you." She smiled, eyes wet. "I'm learning." That afternoon, she took the little tin box and the blanket to her room. Hours later, she came back carrying a small glass frame. Inside was a piece of the blanket, neatly folded with a note that said, "For the one we never got to hold but who never left us." She hung it in the hallway, just beside our family photo. I couldn't speak. My throat tightened with emotion. "You're sure?" I whispered. She nodded. "I want her to be part of our home, not hidden in a freezer." For the first time in decades, I felt a weight lift from my chest. That evening, David's mother called. I heard Melissa's calm voice from the other room. She didn't explain or defend. She simply said, "It was something from my past. Painful, but part of me, and I'm not ashamed anymore." There was silence on the line, and then her mother-in-law's gentle reply, "I understand, dear. We all have stories we hide. Thank you for trusting us enough to show yours." When Melissa hung up, she leaned against the wall and smiled through tears. "Maybe people aren't as cruel as I thought," she said. "Maybe they just need someone to remind them how to be kind," I replied. That night before bed, she came to my room. I was sitting by the window again, watching the stars. She sat beside me, resting her head on my shoulder like she used to. "Mom," she whispered, "thank you for not giving up on me." I brushed a strand of hair from her face. "That's the thing about mothers, Melissa. We never stop waiting, even when the world freezes over." Outside, the wind was soft and the sky clear. The freezer hummed quietly in the background, not as a keeper of secrets anymore, but as a reminder of everything love can survive. And for the first time in a very long time, our house felt warm again. The next morning felt different. For the first time in months, I woke up without that heavy feeling in my chest, the kind that made every breath feel like work. When I walked into the kitchen, sunlight was pouring through the curtains. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Melissa was there again, humming softly as she made breakfast. She looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Mom." There it was again, that word, Mom. For the past few years, she had mostly called me Mother, distant, polite, cold. But now it was Mom, warm, real. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said. "Something smells wonderful." "Pancakes," she said proudly. "Your recipe. Thought I'd try it again." I chuckled. "You never liked my pancakes." "I never liked the burnt ones," she teased, laughing. "But today I'm doing it right." As she flipped a pancake, I watched her. The little gestures she'd inherited from me. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear. The small hum she made while concentrating. For so long I had looked at her and seen everything that went wrong. The distance. The anger, the pride. Now I saw everything I had almost forgotten. Her kindness. Her humor, her heart. "Melissa," I said softly. "You remind me of myself when I was your age." She glanced at me. "I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing." "It's the best thing," I replied. Later that day, she sat down beside me on the couch. "Mom," she said carefully, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said last night. About forgetting. About being kind." I nodded. "I realized something," she continued. "I've been so busy trying to prove I'm strong. I forgot that strength doesn't mean control. It means staying gentle when you could be hard." I smiled, proud of her. "That's the hardest kind of strength, my dear." She looked down, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "I think I owe David an apology, too. And maybe a bit of honesty." I squeezed her hand. "Honesty heals faster than silence ever can." That evening, David came home from work. He looked tired, but when he saw the dinner table set and Melissa waiting, his expression softened. "I made your favorite," she said shyly. "Chicken stew. Mom's recipe." He smiled. "That's brave." I laughed quietly from the corner. "Careful what you say, David. My stew has started family wars before." He grinned, and for the first time, the three of us ate together without tension hanging in the air. It felt almost normal. Almost like family. After dinner, Melissa took out an old photo album. Dust clung to its cover, but when she opened it, the pages came alive. Her baby pictures, school portraits, birthdays, and messy smiles. David leaned over her shoulder, fascinated. "You had the same smile when we met," he said softly. She smiled sadly. I lost it somewhere along the way. I said, "But you found it again?" She looked at me with eyes that glistened like when she was little. "Because you reminded me." The next few days were quiet but full of small miracles. Melissa started helping me with chores again. Real help, not the impatient sighs from before. She'd join me in watering the plants, folding the laundry, even baking bread. And every evening, she'd light a small candle under the photo frame in the hallway. The one with the blanket piece inside. I asked her once, "Why the candle?" She said, "Because I want to keep the light for her. For what could have been." I nodded. "For what still is," I corrected gently. Love never ends. It only changes its form. One afternoon, David's parents visited again, unannounced this time. I was nervous, but Melissa greeted them warmly. Her mother-in-law hugged her. "Dear, we came to see if you're all right." Melissa smiled genuinely. "I'm more than all right. Thank you for understanding." They all sat down for tea, and to my surprise, there was no judgment in their eyes, just curiosity, maybe even respect. Her father-in-law said quietly, "Families are like ice. They can freeze for years, but warmth always finds a way to melt through." I blinked. Funny how strangers sometimes speak the truths we've lived our whole lives. After they left, Melissa turned to me. "Mom, I think I finally understand what you've been trying to teach me all these years." "And what's that?" I asked. "That love isn't about pride," she said. "It's about presence, about staying." I smiled. "Yes, love stays, even when everything else leaves." That night, as I got ready for bed, I looked around my quiet home. The walls that had once echoed with shouting now seemed to hum softly with peace. I ran my fingers along the picture frame one last time before turning off the lights. It felt different now. Not heavy, not cold. Just right. A few days later, Melissa came to me holding a small notebook. "What's that?" I asked. She smiled. "It's a journal. I'm writing again. I used to love writing before. Before everything." I grinned. "I remember. You used to fill pages with poems about rain and sunflowers." She laughed. "I guess some things never change." Then she handed me the first page. At the top she'd written, "The Freezer, a story of thawing hearts." I read the first line and tears filled my eyes. My mother taught me that sometimes love hides in the coldest places, waiting for the right moment to be found again. I closed the notebook and looked at her. "You're turning our story into something beautiful," I whispered. "It already was," she said. "We just had to see it." That night, as the stars shimmered above our quiet home, I felt peace settle over me, the kind of peace that only comes after years of storms. The freezer still hummed softly in the corner, but I didn't hear it anymore. Because now, every sound in this house, every creak, every whisper, every breath, spoke of love, survival, and second chances. It had been 3 months since that night, the night when everything thawed, when silence became a friend again instead of an enemy. The house felt warmer now, not because of the heating, but because of laughter. Real laughter. The kind that fills corners and hides in the curtains. Melissa had started visiting more often. Sometimes she stayed for weekends, sometimes just an afternoon. But every visit left a trace of joy behind. A mug half full of tea, a scarf forgotten on the couch, or a new flower pot by the window. And every time she left, she'd hug me, tight, long, and real. One Saturday morning, I woke up to find her already in the garden. She was trimming the roses, her hair pulled back, her face lit by the early sun. "You're up early," I said, wrapping my shawl around me. She grinned. "Trying to keep up with you, Mom. These roses don't wait for anyone." I chuckled. "Neither does life." She smiled, clipping another branch. "You know, I used to think getting older meant slowing down. But now I see. It's just seeing things clearer." I sat beside her, feeling the cool soil under my palms. "Age doesn't take away our strength, Melissa. It just teaches us where to use it." She nodded slowly. "Maybe that's what I needed to learn from you all along." Later that day, we sat together in the living room. She brought her laptop and said, "I've been thinking about sharing our story online." "Our story?" I asked. She smiled shyly. "Yes, the way we found our way back to each other. Maybe someone out there needs to hear it." I hesitated. "You think people would want to listen to two stubborn women who took a lifetime to say, 'I love you again?'" She laughed. "I think people love truth, Mom, and we have plenty of that." I smiled softly. "Then tell it, just tell it kindly." "I will," she promised. Weeks passed, and I watched as Melissa poured her heart into her writing. Sometimes she'd call me just to ask about small memories. The color of my old apron, the smell of the bread we used to bake, or the song her father used to hum before dinner. Each time she asked, I'd close my eyes and drift back into those moments. They were ordinary memories, but in her voice they became sacred again. "Mom," she said one day over the phone, "I've named the first chapter The Woman in the Freezer." I chuckled. "That's quite a title, mysterious." She giggled. "Exactly. People love mystery. Just make sure it ends with love," I said. "That's the only ending worth telling." When she finally published her story online, she didn't expect much. But within days, it spread. Thousands of people read it, commented on it, shared their own stories of loss, forgiveness, and rediscovery. One message said, "This story reminded me to call my mother again." Another said, "I cried reading this. I thought I was the only one keeping cold memories alive." Melissa showed me the comments, tears in her eyes. "Mom, we helped people." I smiled, feeling my chest swell with something warm. Then the pain wasn't wasted. That night she stayed over. We sat by the window, wrapped in blankets, listening to the rain. "Do you ever think about the things you'd change if you could go back?" she asked softly. I thought for a moment. Maybe a few words I shouldn't have said. Maybe a few I should have. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I used to wish I could erase the years we lost. But now I think those years made this moment possible." I kissed her forehead. "You've grown wise, my girl." She smiled. "Well, I had a good teacher." A few weeks later, Melissa invited me to speak at a small community event she was organizing, a gathering about forgiveness and family. "Me?" I laughed. "I'm no speaker. My audience is the kettle and the cat." She giggled. "You're the heart of the story, Mom. People will listen." So I went. My hands trembled when I stood on that little stage. But when I looked into the crowd, faces full of strangers, yet full of kindness, my fear melted away. I spoke about silence, about pride, about how sometimes love hides behind the words we're too stubborn to say. And when I finished, people stood up and clapped, not loud, not wild, but full of sincerity. Afterward, a young woman came up to me and said, "You reminded me of my grandmother. She always said love needs bravery." I smiled and whispered, she was right. That night, when we returned home, Melissa hugged me at the door. "You did amazing, Mom." I smiled. "You did too. You gave me a stage to say the words I thought I'd buried forever." We stood there for a long time, holding each other in the quiet of the hallway. Then she said, "And I think I want to keep telling stories like this, real stories. Maybe this is what I was meant to do." "And what about you, Mom?" she asked. "What do you want now?" I looked at her and said, "I just want to live my days knowing we found our way home again." Before she left that night, she placed a new frame on my mantel, beside the old one with the blanket. Inside, it was a simple quote, written in her handwriting. "Love may freeze, but it never dies. It just waits for warmth to find it again." I traced the words with my fingers and felt tears slip down my cheek. This was no longer a story about pain or loss. It was about survival, grace, and the miracle of second chances. As I went to bed, I whispered a small prayer. Not for change, not for more time, but simply for gratitude. Because even at 70, I had learned something new. Sometimes the heart just needs to wait long enough for the world to thaw around it. And when it does, everything blooms again. It's strange how quickly the world can change when a story finds its voice. Within weeks, Melissa's story, The Woman in the Freezer, began to spread far beyond our small corner of the city. She started getting emails from people she had never met, mothers, daughters, even men who said they had finally forgiven their parents after reading her words. One message simply said, "Your story melted something I thought was gone forever." When she showed it to me, I felt a lump in my throat. "Melissa," I whispered, "you've done something I never could. You've turned our pain into a light for others." She smiled, eyes glistening. "We did it, Mom, together." Soon, local newspapers wanted to feature her. Then a radio show called, and before long, a small publishing house reached out with an offer to turn her story into a book. She called me the day she signed the contract, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Mom, they want to print it. They said it's not just a story, it's a mirror. For families everywhere." I laughed softly. "And to think it all started in our kitchen? Over burnt pancakes." She giggled. "And a freezer." When the book came out, she handed me the first printed copy. It had a pale blue cover with soft white lettering, like winter skies melting into spring. On the dedication page, my name was written. "For my mother, who taught me that love never truly freezes." I traced the words slowly, feeling my eyes blur with tears. "Do you like it?" she asked nervously. I looked up at her, my heart full. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever read." The weeks that followed were magical. Bookstores displayed her work in their front windows, and readers sent her letters, flowers, and even gifts. But what touched me most wasn't the fame. It was the way people started opening up. Strangers would stop me in town and say, "You must be her mother," and then tell me their own stories of distance, regret, forgiveness. One woman about my age hugged me tightly and whispered, "Your story gave me the courage to call my daughter again after 10 years. I held her and said softly, "Then everything was worth it." One afternoon, as we sat together sipping tea, Melissa said, "Mom, the publisher wants us both to do a small video interview, just to talk about the real story behind the story." I laughed nervously. "Me? Oh, no, my dear. Cameras and I are not friends." She grinned. "You'll be fine. Just be yourself. That's what people love." So I agreed. The day of the interview, they set up cameras in my living room, the same room where so many of our arguments had once echoed. Now, it was bright, calm, and full of light. The interviewer smiled kindly. "Mrs. Harris, how does it feel to have your life turned into a story that's helping so many?" I thought for a moment and said, "It feels like watching winter melt. Pain doesn't disappear, but it softens. It becomes something you can touch without fear." Melissa reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. I turned to her and said, "And it's all because this one learned how to listen with her heart." The interviewer smiled. "That's beautiful." The video went viral. People didn't just see a mother and daughter. They saw themselves. Comments flooded in again. Some said, "I cried with you." Others said, "This reminded me that love can start over at any age." And one, which I'll never forget, said, "You showed us that forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering without hate." Months later, Melissa was invited to speak at a large book event in the city. She asked me to come along, but I hesitated. Crowds had never been my comfort. "Mom," she said gently, "I want them to see you, to know you're real." So I went. The auditorium was full, hundreds of people, faces glowing with emotion and curiosity. When Melissa walked onto the stage, the applause was thunderous. She spoke beautifully about grief, love, and reconciliation. But near the end, she looked straight at me, sitting in the front row, and said, "Everything I've learned about love, I learned from my mother, even when she didn't have the words for it." The audience turned to me and clapped again. I felt tears streaming down my cheeks, and for once, I didn't hide them. After the event, a young journalist approached me and asked, "Mrs. Harris, how does it feel to know your daughter's story changed so many lives?" I smiled softly and said, It feels like watching your child finally find her wings. You spend a lifetime teaching them to walk, and one day, they teach you how to fly. That night, back at home, I sat by my window again, the same spot where I'd watched so many storms. Outside, the snow had started falling, light and silent. Melissa came to sit beside me, her head resting on my shoulder. "You know," she said quietly, "sometimes I still can't believe how far we've come." I chuckled. Life is funny that way. It takes the coldest things and turns them into blessings. She smiled, watching the snow. "Do you ever regret anything, Mom?" I thought for a long time. "No," I said finally. "Even the worst moments carried us here. Every scar is a map. It shows where we've been and how we survived." She squeezed my hand. "Then I'll keep following your map." Before going to bed, she handed me something small, a keychain shaped like a heart, engraved with the words, "For the woman who taught me how to thaw." I laughed softly. "You'll make me cry again." She grinned. "You've earned a few happy tears." That night, as the snow whispered against the windows, I closed my eyes and thought, maybe this is what healing truly is, not forgetting, not erasing, but remembering with peace, because the freezer was never really about what was inside it. It was about what needed to be released, the years of silence, the frozen words, the unlived love, and now everything was warm again. Years slipped by like pages in a well-loved book. Melissa's career blossomed. Her story became a series. Her name known across podcasts, magazines, and book tours. But no matter how far she went, she always came home. Sometimes for holidays, sometimes for no reason at all. Each visit began the same way. The sound of her car in the driveway, the door swinging open, her voice calling, "Mom, I brought pie!" And every time I'd smile and say, "You brought love, that's enough." One quiet afternoon, I was sitting in my favorite chair, wrapped in a knitted shawl, when she came in holding a stack of envelopes. "Fan mail again?" I teased. "Not exactly," she said, setting them on the table. "These are letters from readers, but this time they're addressed to both of us." I blinked in surprise. "To both of us?" She nodded. "They said they wanted to thank the mother behind the story." I opened the first one. The handwriting was careful and slanted. "Dear Mrs. Harris, I lost my mother 3 years ago, but your story helped me forgive her, and myself. Thank you for reminding me that love never really leaves." I read it twice. My hands trembled, not from age, but from the weight of being seen. Melissa smiled softly. "See, Mom? You changed lives without even trying." I looked at her and said, "No, sweetheart. We changed lives by refusing to stay silent." That night, after she'd gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The moonlight spilled through the window, pale and calm. On the table, beside the photo frame and the candle, I laid out the letters one by one. Then I began to write my own. The first one said, "Dear Melissa, I used to think stories belonged to the young, to those still building their lives. But now I see that the old carry stories too, not as dreams, but as gifts." The second letter, "Dear Melissa, if I ever forget to say it again, you saved me, my girl. You thawed the years I thought were gone for good. I didn't know what made me write them. Maybe it was gratitude. Maybe it was time whispering, write while you still can." I tucked each letter carefully into a small drawer beside my bed. Over the next months, the drawer filled. Some letters were long, some short, some just a single sentence. "Don't rush, love. Life waits for the patient. Remember to dance in the kitchen when it rains. You can forgive and still protect your heart." They weren't just for her. They were for the world she would continue touching when I couldn't anymore. One spring morning, she came running in with bright eyes and a newspaper. "Mom, look," she said, handing it to me. There on the front page was her photo, under the headline, "Author Melissa Harris inspires a generation with her story of forgiveness." I stared at it for a long time. My little girl, on the front page. She laughed, blushing. "I didn't even know they'd publish it." I smiled. "You earned it." Every word, every tear, every truth. Then, after a moment, I added, "You know, I think your father would be proud too." Her eyes softened. "I think so too." That evening, as we sat watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "Mom, I want to dedicate my next book to you again, but this time, I want it to be about your life, your lessons, your letters." I blinked. "My letters? How do you even know about those?" She grinned. "I might have peeked into your drawer once or twice." I gasped playfully. "You little thief!" She laughed. They were too beautiful to stay hidden. "Mom, people need to hear them," I sighed, pretending to be stern. "Fine, but only if you promise to write them your way." "I promise," she said. Over the next year, we worked together. She would read aloud a letter, and I'd tell her the story behind it. Some made us laugh until our sides hurt. Others left us holding hands in silence. And slowly, another book was born. This one wasn't about pain. It was about living, really living. She titled it Letters from the Thaw. When it was finally published, she handed me the first copy with tears in her eyes. On the first page, she had written, "For my mother, whose warmth taught the world how to forgive." As years went by, my steps grew slower, but my peace grew deeper. I no longer feared silence. It was simply the sound of a full life resting. Every morning, I'd sit by the window, sip my tea, and reread one of my own letters. It was like visiting old versions of myself, younger, hopeful, brave. Melissa still called every day, and when she couldn't visit, she'd send me little voice notes saying, "Mom, I'm proud of you." Or guess what? Another school added our story to their curriculum. Each time I'd whisper to myself, "You did it, my girl. You really did it." One rainy afternoon, she came to see me with a recording device. "What's this now?" I teased. "I want to record your voice," she said. "So when people hear the audiobook, they hear you. The real woman behind it all." I hesitated, smiling. "I don't have a voice for recording, my dear." She shook her head. "You have a voice that healed people. That's more than enough." So I spoke. I read a few of my letters aloud, my voice trembling but honest. When I finished, she hugged me and whispered, "Now you'll live forever in every word." That night, after she left, I sat quietly by the candle, its flame flickering against the glass frame. The house hummed softly, the old familiar hum that once carried sorrow, now carrying peace. And I realized the freezer had been emptied long ago. But what truly melted wasn't ice. It was the distance between hearts. I smiled and whispered to the empty room, "We made it, my love. We really made it." I never thought peace could sound like this. The soft ticking of the clock, the whisper of wind through the curtains, and the quiet heartbeat of a house that has finally forgiven itself. Every morning feels slower now. The sunlight stays longer on the walls, as if it too doesn't want to leave. Melissa still visits every week. She says she needs the calm of this house to think, to write. I think she just misses home. And I love that she does. One morning she brought me a small wooden box. "What's this?" I asked, brushing my fingers across its smooth lid. She smiled. "It's a memory box. I want us to fill it together, with little things that tell our story." Inside, she'd already placed a few items. A piece of the old blue blanket, a faded photo of me holding her as a baby, the recipe card for my pancakes, and a dried rose from the garden. I laughed softly. "You remembered the burnt pancakes?" She grinned. "How could I forget? That's where our story really began." We sat together on the rug, adding tiny memories, a ring, a letter, a ticket stub from her first book event. Each object felt like a heartbeat captured in time. That afternoon, as she napped on the couch, I sat quietly beside her, watching the rhythm of her breathing. And I thought, one day when she opens this box alone, I hope she doesn't cry. I hope she smiles. Because every piece inside it isn't about loss, it's about life. Lately, I've been writing more, not letters this time, but reflections. I call them mornings with meaning. Every day, I choose one word and write what it's taught me. Patience, grace, Time. Home. For home, I wrote, home isn't made of walls or rooms. It's made of moments, shared glances, unspoken forgiveness, and laughter that lingers long after the voices fade. Melissa says she wants to publish these too someday as my final collection. I told her she could, as long as she promised to keep my favorite tea recipe in the last chapter. One evening, we sat on the porch watching the sky melt into orange and gold. "Mom?" she said quietly. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" I smiled. "You mean after today?" She nodded. I looked at the sky, soft and endless. "I think love comes next," I said. "The kind that never stops. The kind that keeps growing even when we're not looking." She took my hand. "Then you'll always be here." "I already am," I whispered. The next morning, she brought me a journal. "I want you to write something for me," she said. "A message I can keep forever." So I wrote, "My dearest Melissa, remember that life isn't measured by the years we live, but by the warmth we leave behind. Keep giving that warmth to others, to yourself. And whenever you doubt, just listen for laughter in the quiet. That's me reminding you that everything's going to be all right." I closed the journal and handed it back. She read it silently, her eyes glistening. Then she hugged me, the kind of hug that speaks louder than words. Time moved on gently. Seasons changed. The garden bloomed again. And the roses, those stubborn old roses, still found their way toward the sun. Sometimes, when Melissa visited, we'd sit under them, sipping tea, remembering. She'd tell me about her readers, about new people she'd met, about how her stories were being taught in schools. And every time she'd end with, "It's all because of you, Mom," I'd smile and say, "No, my love. It's because you learned how to turn pain into purpose." One evening, she asked, "Do you ever miss the old days?" I thought for a while. "Sometimes, but I think I love these days more." "Why?" she asked. "Because we finally learned what love really means," I said. "And that's something time can't take away." She smiled softly. "You're still teaching me even now." The next day, I wrote one last reflection in my Mornings with Meaning notebook. It was titled Legacy. Legacy isn't what people remember you for. It's what they become because of you. And if my daughter learns to keep her heart open, even when the world feels cold, then I've done everything I was meant to do. That night, before going to bed, I placed the notebook into the memory box. The candle flickered beside it, casting a warm glow over the words. I whispered, "That's enough for one lifetime." Then I smiled, not because it was an ending, but because I knew love doesn't end. It circles back, over and over, through stories, through memories, through every quiet morning yet to come. The day I moved back into Mom's house, it smelled exactly the same. Lavender, cinnamon, and something faintly sweet, like the air still remembered her. I didn't change anything. Not the old curtains. Not the chipped mug she always used. Not even the small dent in the hallway wall where she once dropped a picture frame. Because this wasn't just a house anymore. It was her. In the light. In the warmth. In the silence that still felt alive. A week after the funeral, I found her Mornings with Meaning notebook sitting on the porch table, right where she used to write. The last entry was titled Legacy. I read it out loud, my voice trembling at the last line. "If my daughter learns to keep her heart open, even when the world feels cold, then I've done everything I was meant to do." And just like that, I understood. Her life wasn't just a story to be told. It was a message to be passed on. For months, I couldn't write anything new. Every sentence I tried felt small compared to the weight of her words. Then one morning, while I was watering the roses, I noticed something strange. A single blue flower had bloomed among them. Small, delicate, the exact color of the blanket we'd once buried together. I laughed softly through my tears. "Of course you'd do this," I whispered. That was the day I started writing again. The book I wrote after that was called The Freezer and the Garden. It wasn't really about the secret or the grief or the years we lost. It was about the way we found our way back to each other. I wrote it in her voice, calm, strong, imperfect, real. I wrote about the laughter between arguments, the silent forgivenesses, the pancakes that burned but still tasted like love. When the book was finally published, I dedicated it simply for my mother, who taught me that healing is just another word for remembering with love. The first time I read from it publicly, I was terrified. My hands shook as I held the microphone. But then I remembered her advice. If you tell the truth from your heart, the world will listen, even if it's whispering. So I told our truth, and the room listened. When I finished, an older woman in the audience stood up and said, "Your mother sounds like someone I would have loved to know." I smiled. "She would have loved you too," I said. Years passed. The world changed. But the garden never stopped blooming. I started a small foundation in her name, the Grace Project. It helps older women write their life stories before they're gone, so their memories aren't lost. Every spring, we gather in my backyard. Women of all ages, notebooks in hand, telling stories that deserve to be heard. And every time someone says, "I don't think my story matters," I tell them, "My mother thought the same, until she found her voice at 70. One evening, while cleaning the attic, I found something I'd never seen before. A sealed envelope with my name on it, tucked behind an old photo album. The handwriting was hers. My breath caught. Inside, she'd written just one line. "If you're reading this, it means you're still searching. Remember, love doesn't live in the past. It waits for you in every tomorrow." I sat there for a long time, holding the letter to my chest. She always knew what I needed, even before I did. Now, when people ask me what my mother was like, I don't start with her stories of hardship or pain. I tell them how she laughed, loud and unfiltered. How she sang to the radio even when she didn't know the lyrics. How she believed forgiveness was stronger than any argument. How she made every person feel like they mattered. And most of all, how she turned a freezer full of pain into a garden full of grace. Sometimes on quiet mornings, I sit on the porch with a cup of tea, her favorite blend, and read her reflections aloud. The house listens. The wind carries her words away like she's answering back. I swear I can almost hear her voice saying, "See, Melissa? I told you everything would be all right." And I whisper, "I know, Mom, I know." Years later, my own daughter asked me one day, "Mom, what was Grandma like?" I smiled. "She was magic," I said. "But not the kind that fixes things. The kind that teaches you how to fix them yourself." She nodded thoughtfully. Then she asked, "Do you think she'd be proud of us?" I looked out the window at the roses, and there it was again. That single blue bloom still growing every spring. "Yes," I said softly. "She already is." And so this is how her story ends. Not with silence, not with sorrow, but with continuing. Because when love is real, it doesn't fade. It becomes something bigger, something eternal. Something that lives on every time someone chooses to forgive, to remember, and to love again.